Hello and welcome everybody to this timely fireside chat on lessons to be learned from Sri Lanka's recent economic crisis. It's hosted by the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce in collaboration with the Royal Commonwealth Society in Sri Lanka. I'm Julia Charlton, Chair of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure today to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy. Dr. Kumaraswamy brings over 30 years of amazing experience in economic policy making and research. Currently, he's also serving as the Vice President of RCS Sri Lanka. As the former governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka from 2016 to 2019, he steered the country through turbulent economic times. His unique perspective will provide key insights into Sri Lanka's current economic situation and the potential pathways forward. Sri Lanka has weathered monumental economic challenges recently, including sovereign debt default, severe inflation, and shortages of essential goods. However, recent data indicates recovery and stabilization as tight monetary policy and fiscal reforms take effect. According to the IMF 2023 report, Sri Lanka's GDP is projected to grow at 2.5% in 2024, although some, I think including Dr. Kumaraswamy, have a more optimistic view, perhaps, of Sri Lanka's potential growth trajectory. Implementing critical reforms and policies is essential to restore macroeconomic stability and promote sustained growth. And in this timely discussion, Dr. Kumaraswamy will analyse Sri Lanka's economic landscape and discuss pragmatic solutions to stabilise finances, attract investment, and firmly set the country on the road to revival. So we have a remarkable opportunity today to gain context on Sri Lanka's crisis and way forward from one of the country's top economic minds. Briefly, Sri Lanka has a population of over 22 million and has been regarded as a country with enormous potential yet to be met. So before we turn to Dr. Kumaraswamy, we're going to hear from our collaborator, Royal Commonwealth Society Sri Lanka, which has had an active branch of the Commonwealth for over 75 years. And we're grateful for their partnership in organising this fireside chat. So Iftikhath Aziz, President of the Royal Commonwealth Society Sri Lanka branch, has spearheaded the resurgence of this historic 75-year-old civil society organisation through his dedicated leadership. And for those interested in Sri Lanka's future, this discussion presents a unique window into the country's crisis and roadmap ahead. So thank you so much, Dr. Kumaraswamy and Mr. Aziz, for your time and insights. So Aziz, over to you for some words about RCS Sri Lanka and to introduce Dr. Kumaraswamy.
Okay. Thank you, Julia, for those kind words. Actually, RCS Sri Lanka has been in existence for the last 75 years, since Sri Lanka got its independence from the British. And right along, it has been a very vibrant and very, very active organization until about 5-6 years ago, when we had certain issues like COVID, the economic downturn, and some negative factors. But we are making a big effort to turn it around. We means the people, the government, all stakeholders, and our friends overseas, like the Commonwealth and so many other stakeholders. So I'm also very confident and that we are moving in the right direction, and we have a lot of potential. Unfortunately, if we take these 5-6 years came into, it was a bit of a blow for us Sri Lankans, but we are all confident. As you rightly said, all factors are moving upwards. So we think, I think as a layman, I'm not an economist, that we have a bright future ahead. And as for my friend, good friend, Dr. Kumaraswamy, he's an expert in the field. He is one of the most respected, I would say the most respected economist in Sri Lanka, who is regarded both in Sri Lanka as well as overseas. He's a bag full of intelligence, knowledge, good advice, and never a negative attitude on his part. He sees great things ahead for Sri Lanka. So anyway, thank you very much, Julia, and the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce for your partnership with us. We appreciate it. We are prepared to go any length to make it successful. Thank you very much.
So over to you, Dr. Kumaraswamy, I think.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Iftikhath. Let me first say that it's a great pleasure to be with you today. Thanks both to the Royal Commonwealth Society Sri Lanka, as well as the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, which you had, Julia. So hi, hello to everybody, and it's good to be with you. Let me start by saying that, at the time of independence, Sri Lanka was second to Japan on most socioeconomic indicators. Since then, we've regressed. Several Asian countries have, I should say, second to Japan in Asia. I should have qualified that. And since then, several Asian countries have overtaken us and we've regressed. There are a number of causal factors, significant causal factors. There's social, political, as well as economic. In my view, perhaps I'm biased because of my interest. I think the main cause of Sri Lanka's regression has been macroeconomic stress. That macroeconomic stress has been caused primarily by the government's fiscal operations, the budgetary operations of the government. We have been living beyond our means really almost from the outset, from independence in 1948. In fact, in 1959, the notable Cambridge economist, Professor Joan Robinson, came to Sri Lanka. She, of course, is no neoliberal economist. She was a strong Keynesian who was one of the earliest experts on China. She came and famously said, "You Ceylonese, as we were then, have eaten the fruit before you planted the tree." And I think that was a very apt description of what we were doing then, and we have continued to do for the last 75 years. So this fiscal indiscipline, unsustainable fiscal outcomes, which have consistently undermined the stability of the economy, leading to inflation, balance of payments pressure, has resulted in us going to the IMF 17 times. And the fiscal imbalances were amplified by fiscal dominance in monetary policy. The central bank's independence was constrained at times, and it had to undertake significant amounts of deficit financing and even financial repression to keep interest rates low to enable the government to finance its deficit. So all this has meant that we've never had a stable platform in the economy to promote the kind of sustained investment that is required for a country to make the kind of progress countries to the east of us have done. And if you look at those countries, all of them had very solid macroeconomic fundamentals. Contained budget deficits, low interest rates born out of stability in the economy, competitive exchange rates, often somewhat undervalued. This was almost the opposite of what we had in terms of outcomes, in terms of macro indicators, where we tended to have large fiscal deficits, high inflation, because of that, high nominal interest rates, and constant pressure on the exchange rate. So this kind of scenario has continued right through, and as I said, it's reflected in the number of IMF programs we've had to have. But one could ask the question, why have we been able to get away with it for so long? How is it that we managed to go on living beyond our means without spilling over into the kind of crisis we've had over the last couple of years? And that's because Sri Lanka in 1977 was the second country after Chile to liberalize its economy among those countries which went down the inward-looking disease route. Because of that, the traditional donors, basically the Western countries and Japan, were very keen to demonstrate good development outcomes in a country which had a liberal polity and a liberal economy. So we got very generous amounts of foreign aid, which enabled us to live beyond our means. And this foreign aid came on extremely generous terms. Most of it, about 60%, maybe 2/3, came from the concessional windows of the World Bank and the ADB. And we are talking about money with 10 years grace period, 30 years maturity, less than 1% administration charge. So that money enabled us to live beyond our means, get it financed on terms that were bearable. And we carried on like this until, I would say, around 2010 or a little before that, when we graduated to middle-income country status and lost access to this extremely concessional money. Since then, we continue to live beyond our means, but we had to finance it through access to international capital markets. So the discipline that is imposed by rating agencies and international capital markets began to kick in. But it didn't change our behavior sufficiently. And this was the kind of historical genesis of the problem, which was constantly building up. And one should also point out that this graduation to middle-income country status, which takes place when a country's per capita income crosses a certain threshold, I think it's 2,000 per capita income of $2,000 US, we crossed the income threshold through growth in the non-tradable sectors. Sectors like construction, transport, personal services, public administration. These are sectors that do not earn or save foreign exchange. So we were borrowing abroad on commercial terms and putting it into sectors which was not generating or saving foreign exchange. So it was inevitable that it would lead to a crisis. This was recognized in 2017, 2018, and an IMF program very similar to the one that we are in the midst of today was implemented. And we were beginning to put in place the kind of policies which are now being put in place. But in 2019, we had a policy reversal, and we had what was called a homegrown set of policies, which took us away from the reform path we were on from, say, 2016 or 2015 to 2019. So that was the kind of historical genesis of the problem. But more approximately, there was, of course, the pandemic, the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, the impact of inflation due to supply chain disruption, all those other things, which I think hampered all economies across the world during the period of the COVID and immediately afterwards. So those issues, plus some major policy mistakes domestically, like banning of the import of chemical fertilizer, wide-ranging tax cuts, the delay in going to the IMF until our usable reserves were down to 25 million in a country with an import bill of about 18 to 20 billion per year, and debt payments somewhere between 5 and 5.5 billion. So taking all those things together meant that the crisis, which was brewing for quite a long time, which we started to address, say, between 2015 and 2019, then we had the policy reversal and exogenous factors like the pandemic and the impact of various issues in the world economy, meant that the economy finally kind of spilled over into a mega pluri-crisis. Now, since I would say about April, when the government decided to change course and go to the IMF, April of 2022, the government changed course and went to the IMF. And we have put in a stabilization program under an extended fund facility, and significant progress has been made in terms of stabilizing the economy. So after 6 consecutive quarters of negative growth and a peak to trough loss in GDP of about 11% over 2021 and 2022, the economy, let me get that right. The peak to trough decline of 11% over 2022 and 2023, the economy in the third quarter of 23 recorded a positive growth of 1.5%. So that hopefully has meant that we've turned the corner in terms of growth. Inflation, which peaked at 70% in September 2022, is now down to about 5.9%. And the reserves, which on the dates Sri Lanka declared a standstill on its external debt payments, were down to $25 million. They are now up. Of usable reserves were down to 25 million. Their now usable reserves are now up to about 3 billion, and gross reserves are about 4.5 billion. So significant improvement in the macro indicators. The economy has stabilized and a bottom has been reached. But we must remember that these sound fundamentals in terms of the macro economy have been reached at a low level equilibrium, i.e. when the economy is still growing well below potential. So what we now need to do is to push through the structural reforms, which will increase the growth framework and get us onto a higher growth trajectory. I personally feel we can get up to 4 to 5%. The IMF thinks that it will be 3% between now and 2032, or from next year really, to 2032. But I feel the potential is significantly higher. And in our discussions, I can try and expand upon why I think the potential is higher. So bottom line is, economy has been stabilized. We now need to put in place the policies that are going to get us on a path of sustained growth and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumaraswamy. So it's very interesting to hear about the history and obviously the various bailouts which Sri Lanka has had. And this, as you've characterized it, has almost been like the kind of crack cocaine of relatively cheap money. What's going to make it different this time, that for the growth to be really sustainable and to put Sri Lanka on a long-term growth trajectory?
So there are a number of measures the government has already taken and others that are in the pipeline, which are designed to address the weaknesses in terms of our macro economic management. As I said, in my view, macroeconomic stress was the main cause of the problem. And I think now the authorities are putting in place specific measures to address them. So I said the budget deficit was the main source of instability in the system. Now, there's a new public finance management bill, which will be presented to Parliament shortly. I believe it's in the Attorney General's department and should go to Cabinet very soon. And what I haven't seen the bill, but what I expect it will do is to have some fiscal rules. And the key rule, I think, will be that Sri Lanka will have a primary surplus in its budget. By a primary surplus, I mean that every year, total revenue would exceed total expenditure in that given year, excluding interest payments. So what that means is that you are meeting all your expenditure without adding on to the debt stock. So that over time will reduce the overall debt stock and get us on the right path. So that will become hopefully the kind of central fiscal rule around which the budgets will be organized. Now, by contrast, between 1954 and last year, there were only 5 years which had a fiscal surplus. Which had a primary surplus in the budget. So we were adding on to debt in all the other years, all but 5 years between 1954 and 2023, we have been adding on to debt. So if you have a fiscal rule that you're not going to add on to debt each year by having a primary surplus, that clearly, and it's going to be embedded in law, that is clearly a major advance. The second thing is the Central Bank Act. A new Central Bank Act has already gone through Parliament and had been enacted. And that has a couple of very important changes from the earlier foundational law of the central bank. That is, the central bank will no longer be able to participate in the primary auctions for treasury bills. This was the way the central bank did its deficit financing. The main way. There were others too, but this was the main way it did it. And it's the most egregious form of, in common parlance, money printing. Essentially, the central bank buys the government's paper and gives the government money. So that is now been prohibited by law. So hopefully that problem, and also the central bank used to have financial repression. It used to artificially keep interest rates low to make it cheaper for the government to borrow. And also, concurrently, it of course led to unsustainable credit expansion when you have artificially low interest rates. So all this, large budget deficits, deficit financing, monetary policy repression, all this means that excess demand is created in the system, which leads, one, to inflation, and two, some of that demand leaks into imports, and you have an unsustainable budget deficit. And then, as part of a macroeconomic mismanagement, we also try to keep the exchange rate stable by using our reserves, our scarce reserves. So it was a completely non-virtuous cycle of macroeconomic management. And we used to go to the IMF and kind of put it right for a period of time, and then again regress. Usually when elections come, the discipline goes and everything becomes a problem. And but now what we are trying to do is to have clear frameworks for macroeconomic policy making, really implemented through these two pieces of legislation, which I think are the centerpiece of the macroeconomic reforms that are taking place. And the important thing is that not only are there clear frameworks embedded in this legislation, but they're going to be also embedded in law. So this, I think, hopefully now gets us to a position where the earlier policy reversals and slippages will be deterred to a great extent.
Right. And this is unprecedented to embed these disciplines into law. What do you think has created the political will to find this acceptable at this stage?
I think mainly the depth of the crisis. I mean, I think it was Einstein who said that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and again and expect different outcomes.
Yes.
I think it finally dawned on us that we have been, using the same playbook, as I said, of fiscal policy, monetary policy, exchange rate policy, same playbook again and again, 16 IMF programs before this one. And, it was getting us deeper and deeper into the hole. So finally, I think people twigged that maybe we should find ways of deterring the kind of mismanagement that we've had over the years. And the depth of the crisis, as you know, was unprecedented.
Absolutely, yes. You mentioned the rupee, and obviously there's been issues about it depreciating significantly against the US dollar. What measures do you think should be taken to stabilize the currency over the long run?
So measures have already been taken. The central bank has embedded flexible inflation targeting, FIT as they call it, as the regime for monetary policy formulation. Now, under flexible inflation targeting, so the government and the central bank, really the government sets the inflation target in consultation with the central bank, and there's an agreement signed between the finance minister and the governor setting the target. It's now 5% plus minus 2%. And as part of that regime, the exchange rate becomes the first line of defense against any exogenous shocks. And to use it as the first line of defense, you have to have it flexible and basically let the supply of and demand for foreign exchange in the market determine the rate. So that has now been adopted as a framework for exchange rate management. And again, it's embedded in the law, right? In the new Central Bank Act. That flexible inflation targeting would be the regime. And within that regime, the exchange rate has to be managed flexibly as the first line of defense. In the past, what we did was we tried to protect a particular level of the exchange rate and not allow demand and supply to affect it. So invariably, what would happen was there'd be a shortage of foreign exchange. The supply would not match the demand. And then the central bank would need to infuse reserves, deplete its reserves by putting dollars into the market to meet the demand and keep the rate stable. And of course, in the end, it's indefensible. It doesn't work. In the end, it has happened again and again that the rate would collapse, would depreciate sharply, and we would have lost a large amount of foreign reserves as well. So this has happened several times as well. So hopefully, again, we've learned our lessons. We've embedded the flexible exchange rate management into the new Central Bank Act through the adoption of flexible inflation targeting as our monetary policy regime.
So Sri Lanka has historically got quite strong institutions, for example, rule of law, common law and so on. So there's no reason really from that perspective why Sri Lanka cannot achieve all of this. I just wondered if you have any views on enhancing institution building, perhaps. Would that assist at all? And also I wondered if you had any comments about your universities and your education sector and the role that they might play in the future economic stability of Sri Lanka.
So I think that's a very important point. Our institutions have declined, there is no doubt. In the early days after independence, Sri Lanka's public administration was held up as a model. In fact, Lee Kuan Yew has said more than one in public that he looked to Sri Lanka as a model, or Ceylon as it was then, as a model public administration. But there has been a steady erosion of the independence of the public administration through its politicization. It was a steady process. Initially, I think it was in the 1960s, the Public Service Commission, which was responsible for recruitment, promotion, etc., discipline, etc., in the public service, was emasculated. And I think the government appointed one or two people outside that process, which the Public Service Commission oversaw. That was the start of it. Appointed people as secretaries. But we had the concept of permanent secretaries, as other countries do. The permanent was dropped and it became secretaries, and people were appointed outside the Public Service Commission framework. Then subsequently in the 80s, it became, I think, I don't know whether the Constitution has it in it, but anyway, it became the practice that all secretaries to ministries were appointed by the president. So that politicized the public administration in a major way. And it has led to its significant reduction in the way it should operate.
That's probably a lesson to many countries in the Western world as well, actually, isn't it?
Exactly. You need to be careful about appointing too many special advisors, yeah, yes. And other things that some countries are doing. So that strengthening the public administration, and also the Commonwealth Latimer House principle, the separation of powers between the executive, legislature, and judiciary, that has to be reinforced. That has also, I think, been eroded in Sri Lanka. We've seen the judiciary actually act pretty independently recently, but that needs to be reaffirmed and strengthened. And as I said, the autonomy of the central bank has been also increased. So these are all things going in the positive direction. We need to make sure that these things get embedded, reinforced, and are continued, and we don't have any policy reversal. I think, clearly it is not. It's not natural for our politicians to have their hands tied, as this new legislation is beginning to do. So they also need to understand the new way of doing things. And I think if everybody interested in rebuilding the country and getting it on a path of prosperity, and the potential is there for that to be achieved, then needs to understand that these institutional changes need to be made, and our institutions need to be made strong and resilient and independent.
Yes, that's very interesting. And do you have any more thoughts about the education sector and the strength of your universities, research programs? Where are all the people going to come from within Sri Lanka to support these institutions?
Yeah, so we are at the moment having a particularly challenging time in terms of skilled people going out of the country, because this latest crisis, the depth of it was so severe that a number of younger professionals with skills have migrated. So that's something we need to address going forward. And also the quality of our education also needs to be improved. Sri Lanka does extremely well in terms of enrollment ratios, including girls. At the moment, there are more girls in tertiary education than there are boys. So we've done very well in terms of participation rates, enrollment rates in education. But the quality of education is a challenge. Lee Kuan Yew said that the prognosis for any society that pays its teaching profession not well enough, that prognosis has to be bad, because each generation attracts a poorer quality of teachers and therefore poorer outcomes from the education system, outputs from the education system. So we need to make the terms and conditions for teachers better. Very difficult because we don't have the money at the moment, but over time that has to be addressed. And the STEM subjects, we have lots of people in tertiary education who are doing the art subjects, and where employability becomes a challenge. So we need the science, technology, engineering, maths, that whole cluster of disciplines to be strengthened in terms of the pedagogy, as well as getting more people getting through the system with those qualifications.
Yes, yes. And do you have any views on physical infrastructure improvement? And in that, I would include internet access and so on. Do you have any thoughts about that and its role in developing the economy? Because IT looks like a potential bright spot in Sri Lanka's economy.
Yes. Clearly, one of the challenges we've had, again, if you take the 75-year sweep of history, is, Sri Lanka did extremely well in terms of its social development. One of the reasons we got that generous amounts of aid that I talked about previously was because we were, our social indicators were improving. We were punching way above our weight in terms of the UNDP's Human Development Index, the Millennium Development Goal, all such indicators. Sri Lanka did much better than one would expect for a country of its level of development. So that went well, and resources were diverted for it. But in the process, we didn't get the mix between social development and investment in physical infrastructure. Right? So physical infrastructure was really starved of resources for a long time. Now, more recently, we are beginning to put more money into it, but the process of onboarding projects into the public investment program broke down. We had a very rigorous process in the past where, first the ministry concerned, then the National Planning Department in the Ministry of Finance and Planning, and then a committee of development secretaries in the key ministries looked at it. So there were 3 levels of screening before it went to cabinet. Now it just goes willy-nilly, ministers just put projects, unsolicited projects. So we have really not deployed our resources, often borrowed resources, in the most efficient way. So we have to strengthen the whole process of public investment program preparation, the onboarding of projects into the public investment program, one. And so to make sure that the projects are aligned with national priorities and that they get over the hurdle rate of return. And having strengthened that process, I think we need to, as you say, focus on improving infrastructure. And we are beginning to do that. Certainly the roads have had some investment, though not as efficiently as they could have been. And there's been a lot of corruption. Then there is our ports are getting developed. There are 2 new terminals being planned for the Colombo port, and Hambantota port also is being upgraded, and we can see the results after the long lease was given to China Merchant, who are a world-class port operator. So there are and the telecom sector, again, they're trying now to strengthen the capital base of the sector through some privatization, through divestiture. So, if you look at the different infrastructure sectors, there is attention being focused. and partly through divestiture, partly through investment supported by assistance from our development partners. So I think there is now a much better understanding that without getting infrastructure going, it'll be difficult to have sustained growth. And what you say about IT is perfectly true. We do okay in terms of internet penetration and cost. It's pretty good from what I know in terms of international comparison. But more needs to be done. More investment, particularly the rollout of 5G, is now ahead of us. And maybe the divestiture program that's being envisaged will help to bring in the capital and know-how needed for that rollout. And that's in terms of the infrastructure, but also in terms of provision of IT services. This is one of the fastest growing exports.
Yes.
In Sri Lanka. And about 3-4 years ago, the World Bank did a study and found that the startup ecosystem in the IT sector is extremely impressive in Sri Lanka. The outcomes of that study were very positive. So we need to create the stable conditions in the country for that sector to grow.
Yes, I felt there was a wave of pessimism, certainly from sort of 2020 to the end of 2022, which seemed to cast a pall over that sector almost in terms of how enthusiastic they felt. But logically, it should be going very well.
Yes, and I think people are beginning to pick up the pieces again, yeah.
So Sri Lanka is a famously fertile country agriculturally. Do you think enough is being done to support more expensive high-yield crops and to look at export of higher value agricultural produce and possibly manufacturing linked to that? Do you think there should be more support or more direction in that area?
I think we certainly need more direction and the right policies, really. That 25% of the labor force in Sri Lanka derives its primary income from agriculture. But the share of agriculture in GDP is only 7%.
Yes, I was thinking of examples like New Zealand, who've done extremely well in this area.
Exactly. So that's the kind of direction. So agriculture and dairy together, both of those are areas where, I mean, the current baseline is so low in terms of productivity. It's not difficult to get an upside, but we need to get the right policies in place. What we're doing now is basically subsidizing farmers through free water, through highly subsidized, sometimes free fertilizer, through guaranteed prices, etc. And so there's a large number of farmers who are getting their noses above the water through all this support that's being given. And so we are really trapping them in low productivity, low income agriculture.
Yes, sort of subsidizing inefficiency.
Exactly, right. So what we need to do is to have much more efficient agriculture, and we have to change some of the laws, archaic laws, to have greater flexibility in terms of land use and crop mix. And really, you know, there was a Harvard team that was here under Professor Ricardo Hausman. They reckon at our level of development, there should be between 15 and 17% of the labor force in agriculture, not 25. Yeah. But then you have to find dynamism in other sectors of the economy to absorb that labor. So, you know, it has to be a fairly holistic process of getting the economy moving and modernizing agriculture. For instance, the part of the problem is that in the southwest quadrant of the country, which is the most fertile, the pressure on the land is tremendous. You know, the size of holdings in that area of the country has just become unviable in terms of profitable agriculture.
Right, not sustainable units. Yeah.
Exactly, and the legal system also contributes to it. So we have to find ways really of either having farmer associations or cooperatives or whatever. I mean, Thailand, it's a model really, though I think their holdings are a bit bigger, but they've been extremely successful in forming farmer associations to modernize their agricultural sector. So those are the kind of things. There is a large World Bank project that is in process, from what I can remember, which is designed to modernize our agriculture. So we need to press ahead with that.
Do you think more education in the agricultural sector would be useful, like agricultural colleges, upgrading the sort of people who may see agriculture as a career in terms of the business management of agriculture?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm sure there is merit in that. And we have a fairly large agricultural extension service, which is wholly ineffective. It's been politicized and really, I mean, it just doesn't work. So we need to upgrade and get the best out of that network that's already in place, but is not, doing what it could and should do.
So talking of where some of these workers may find other roles, what about the tourism sector? I mean, Sri Lanka is a famously beautiful country. Lots of tourists would love to go there. I think if it was easier to go, more inviting, and the infrastructure was better, and there's a service sector, that's obviously a massive undertaking, but you still have a very good base of this beautiful country with an existing tourism industry. How do you think that should be built up?
So clearly, I would be biased, but I've been with the Commonwealth for almost 20 years, worked in the Commonwealth Secretariat, traveled to, I don't know, 20, 30 countries. In my view, in my biased view, I suspect, there isn't a more beautiful country. It really is spectacularly beautiful. And you get such diversity in a very compact land area. You probably, I mean, you could go to India and get everything you get here, but you have to travel for days to do that. Here you have, whether it's, you have the flora and fauna in different parts of the country. In the dry zone, the wet zone is different. You have the cultural triangle. You have the tremendously spectacular beauty of the hill country, the beaches, the game parks, everything. And you can do all that in a couple of weeks. So if you want to go and lie on the beach, you can. But if you want to get about and see a lot of things, you can do that as well. So it is, the potential is tremendous. There's no two ways about it. And again, I'm biased as a Sri Lankan. Sri Lankans are instinctively friendly people.
Yes, definitely.
Sometimes we are not nice to each other. That's also a part of our history. But if there is no kind of political agitation which gets people worked up and do not nice things to each other, people left to themselves in this country are naturally friendly and certainly very welcoming of foreign visitors. So it's a very good place to come. And I have not come across a single diplomat or international civil servant who has been stationed in Sri Lanka and who has not been very regretful when their term ends.
I'm sure. Yeah. So I'm thinking of the sort of structural changes to build that sector, because clearly that it has so much potential.
It does. And I think, so we need some clarity in terms, because you see, at the moment, we are targeting about 5 million tourists. Now, Malaysia gets over 20 million, right? They have a similar, a slightly larger population,
yes.
But probably the country we can compare most appropriately. So you can see the upside there is. But we have to get the hotels inventory up, the infrastructure up, the airport it is being modernized. That has to carry on. So we have to build the infrastructure, and that is happening. The couple of highways, one southern highway has been built, the central highway is being built. That will make mobility easier. And we are investing in the rail system as well. I think the Indian government is assisting us on that. So we have much more to do to get to get the full potential realized, and also people, as you implied earlier. Now we have lost quite a lot of people from the tourism sector as well in the last few years. So we need to have the people trained as well. So, I mean, the stuff is being done. The tourist board is getting active. The promotion is now starting again after the difficulty we've had, because there was a fairly long period, like there was COVID and then the crisis, which has meant that the sector, and before that there was the Easter bombing. So there have been a number of things that has disrupted the tourism sector. So it's only after now, 4 years, that we are beginning to be able to focus on developing and promoting the sector, and that is happening here.
Yes, yes. So I know.
And of course, the sector really, it has a lot of spillover effects. Growth in
Yes.
tourism, as we implied at the outset, the handicraft people, the tour guides, the drivers. So it really does have percolates through the system any kind of benefits that come, and we need to upgrade our inventory, upgrade our services, so that we move higher up the market, really, in terms of value. At the moment, the daily spend is rather low.
Yes, you do.
We need to
Yes.
get that up.
Yes, because too many people who aren't spending very much don't contribute that much to the economy. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in other areas, I wonder if you see a role for the capital markets at all within equity capital markets for your tech companies, with perhaps in quite a small way within Sri Lanka. Do you see that as part of the growth story?
Definitely, I think so. I think, let me start with talking about FDI more generally and then talk about the sector, the tech sector. But, whether you're a country as large as China or as small as Singapore, FDI has played a transformative role in the development of countries. Now, Vietnam, for instance, is probably the latest example of that. So we have had I would say, very, very disappointing record of attracting FDI. If you remember the World Bank's Doing Business Index, which now no longer is being published, but on several of the 10 pillars, we could be doing a lot better. And we've known, the disappointing thing is that we've known what we have to do in terms of improving the investment climate, in terms of having a more focused investment promotion effort, things like that. And of course, unstable macroeconomic fundamentals are not conducive to FDI flows. So we have been, as I said, very poor in terms of outcomes as far as foreign FDI flows are concerned, despite despite the rhetoric about FDI and exports. On both counts, we have done badly, which is why one of the reasons why we ran into this trouble as well, because we're a classic twin deficit country. We have a large budget deficit and we have a large current account deficit in the balance of payments, mainly because we have had historically, this is another thing in terms of policy failure, we've had a bias, an anti-export bias in our policy mix. What are the elements? Overvalued exchange rate color at the time, protection, high levels of protection, and we've had these para tariffs which have prevented us from benefiting from these cross-border supply chains. In the last 10, 20 years, it is the global and regional supply chains which have been the most dynamic component of the international trading system.
Yes.
Now, in that process, you bring stuff in, you do your little bit, and you send it out.
Free
now,
trade
if you put a para tariff in the middle of that, you become uncompetitive.
Yes.
And we've done just that. We are now committed to taking them away, but we can't do it straight away because of the loss of revenue. We're having revenue problems in terms of revenue.
Yeah, I guess you can do it in certain zones, like special economic zones, free trade zones initially. And I know that the port city is got somewhat of those characteristics, although not so much in manufacturing. Is that right?
That's right. It will essentially be a services center.
Yes.
Modeled on, you mentioned Dubai, modeled on Dubai, and the Dubai Financial Center. It is clearly the potential is there. The land has been reclaimed. We now need to get the developers to come in. Sri Lanka has another advantage in terms of time zone. given our time zone, if
Yes.
you wake up a little early in the morning, you can catch the opening in the Far East.
Yes.
And if you stay at work a little bit, you can catch the opening in North America.
Yes, perfect. Perfect
yeah,
time zone.
Exactly. And with modern technology, you can be a digital nomad or whatever you call
Yes.
people.
Yes.
Or as companies, you can set up and
Yes.
enjoy the capacity to reach into the time zones from the Far East to North America.
I guess to put it simply, to attract inward investment, FDI, people need to have a reasonable level of confidence that they're going to make money, right? And that their rights are going to be protected. And that will only come over time through actually demonstrating that, I suppose.
Yeah, yes, I think so. I mean, that's why I said that in terms of the investment climate, clearly it's not just about tax holidays, right? I mean, those we have given, but they don't really work, in my view. What's more important is to have political stability, macro stability, the rule of law, and you can enforce your contracts. Those things are much more important, and the research has shown that. And we still need to do some work to get all that up to speed to make ourselves competitive.
Yeah, I do think tax holidays in certain economic zones can kickstart people, encourage some companies to make investment, but without the things you mentioned, that on their own, they're really not useful.
No, yeah.
So just to go back to where I started the earlier question, which was capital markets. Obviously, FDI is direct investment, but what about capital markets? What about growing your own capital markets, even in a small way, to fund your tech sector? Or do you think that the capital markets, securities markets are too early stage to look at that?
No. I think we already have an embryonic
yes.
capital market sector.
Yes, you do. And a long history, actually. Of
exactly. And so we have some very good people in that sector. So I think one of the things that the Securities and Exchange Commission is, has been working on is to see, basically, to deepen the market. And to have more instruments. So again, probably things have got stuck a bit, in the last 4 or 5 years, simply because there was too much uncertainty in the system. But as stability returns, and people have more confidence, the pension sector, it's very low penetration. So there is a whole lot of stuff that can be built on a greater penetration of pensions.
Yes.
Insurance, insurance also.
Absolutely.
Very low penetration.
Yeah. I was also thinking about something like a Sri Lankan NASDAQ in a small way, or a small version of AIM for your startup type early stage companies.
Yeah. Now, my knowledge is a bit short. There is another board. I'm not sure what they call it. I think they have one, or they are working on one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I would see that as part of the components. And then
there is another board.
The other area I was just thinking is linked to tourism is this idea that Malaysia's obviously gone quite big on, of Malaysia, my second home, of encouraging people of independent means to take up residence in a country. And I know Sri Lanka does have that program actually at the moment, but I would imagine that because of all the turmoil recently, it hasn't been so popular. Is that something you think will be extended?
I think it will. I don't think anybody's going to take that away.
Yeah.
But the thing, as you say, as I said, people who actually come and live here find it a very amenable place. And, this is another area of great potential, is having head offices here. Now, more and more companies are coming to India. They're relocating to India as part of this global reconfiguring of supply chains that is taking place. And, one is they could have a facility in Colombo to have more resilience in their supply chain. They could have a large facility in India and a smaller one in Sri Lanka because it's no longer just cost effectiveness, right? What the pandemic has shown is that resilience is as important. So that's one way of having, to have a bit to introduce more resilience into their supply chain,
Yes. Yeah.
and then to have their head offices here.
Yes.
Is by far the, again, I'm probably being biased maybe, but in my view, I'm trying to be as objective as possible, the most amenable city in South Asia. It's a good place to live. So again, as I said, you could have some headquarters here, you can have a backup facility here, particularly as part of, say, a disaster management framework as well. That's another. It can play into that as well.
Yes. Yes. Well, Sri Lanka's certainly got its work cut out. There's an awful lot of building to be done, isn't there, in all directions in all of these sectors.
Yeah.
So-
No, that has been our weakness. We have, in the past, we've got to where we have done now on stabilization, though we've never had as bigger challenges this time. But we've been okay in stabilizing. But then, as I said, we get distracted by politics and things like that. So two lessons for ourselves. One is we can't allow politics to trump economics in the way we have done. You can't separate the two. I think it's naive to think you can separate the two, but you can't allow politics to dominate economics in the way we have done in the past. That we have to stop. And secondly, I think another lesson is that, you can't keep making the same mistakes. I mean, you just have to change it. And we seem to be learning. We are coming up with clear frameworks. We are putting them into laws, as I said. So all that hopefully means that we're turning a new leaf in terms of macroeconomic management. But now we have to have a laser-like focus on the structural reforms. We need to identify the most critical ones and really press ahead with that. We can't get distracted.
Absolutely.
And allow things to drift.
Yes. So, Dr. Kumaraswamy, you served as the Director of Economic Affairs at the Commonwealth Secretariat. So, how do you view the role and relevance of the Commonwealth for member countries, and in particular for Sri Lanka at the moment? What more could the Commonwealth be doing to support Sri Lanka in its growth trajectory?
Actually, the Commonwealth, if its potential is realized fully, can be used much more in today's world.
Yes.
Because we are having an increasingly multipolar world. We are having a world where regional blocks are gaining greater salience. So an association which has a membership which spans every continent in the world can help in getting people to talk to each other in a non-threatening space, right? I think it was Sir Shuratt Ramphal who, I think the phrase he used was something like, the Commonwealth can't negotiate for the world, but it can certainly help the world talk to each other.
Yes.
The members of the world, different constituents of the world, talk to each other. That's where it can play a role, because it has this great geographical span and a membership of 50-odd countries, and representing all levels of the development spectrum. So you can, it's a good forum, a non-threatening forum, and you don't have to commit yourself in law to have any binding commitments. Commonwealth doesn't work that way, but it's a great forum for dialogue and trying to build consensus.
Yes, yes. And it would be good to perhaps make it more widely known amongst the business community that I think there's business school research which talks about the Commonwealth advantage of a roughly 20% cost advantage of doing business between Commonwealth countries because of the similarities in some of the systems and so on.
Exactly. The language, of course, English is a big help.
Yes.
Then you have legal systems, administration systems, quite a lot of similarities and overlap, which, as you say, I think it 15 to 20% advantage, they say.
Yes. So, Dr. Kumaraswamy, it's been wonderful talking to you. And I just wonder if you could perhaps share with us where you hope, all being well and everything being done that you're expecting to be done, Sri Lanka will be in 5 years' time. How would you like the economy to look at that point?
Given my background, the most important thing I would look for is for us to get over this macroeconomic stress that we've had for the last 76 years or whatever since independence. We really have to get over it. But as I said, we have got clear frameworks now for macroeconomic policy making. We've embedded it in the law. We have to make sure that those laws are not diluted in any way. And I think it's up to the people of Sri Lanka to protect those laws, because there will be interested parties who would want to untie their hands.
Yes.
But these laws are designed to tie the hands of people who have not done very well over the last 76 years. Anyway, that's one thing. Clearly, we need to have macro stability and keep in place the measures that have been put in place to achieve that. Then secondly, a big opportunity over the next 5, 10, or even longer years is what's happening in India. As you know, I mean, India is expected to be the fastest growing large nation in the next 10, 20 years.
Yes.
Southern India is probably the 5 states in Southern India are probably growing in double digits already. So we, one, have proximity, obviously, but though we've had proximity, the infrastructure in both countries has been very poor for a long time. But you're beginning to see improvement now. In both countries, you see ports, airports, railways, everything is being modernized. And so the transaction costs of cross-border business, which these supply chains and production networks need, are coming down, right? So that it's opening up opportunities. Also, if you look at East and Southeast Asia, when first Japan and then China had their growth surges, all the countries, or many of the countries in the region, were able to plug into supply chains and they were all lifted up. I think the term is this wild geese formation. Mm-hmm. So now with India having its growth spurt, or likely growth spurt, then this South Asia can have the similar effect of this kind of wild geese formation and everybody getting pulled up.
Yes,
so a big
rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that's so there's a real opportunity there. So improving connectivity and as I say, plugging into supply chains, and also providing services, financial services, tourism, etc.
Yes.
To India.
Yes.
People, people have talked in the past about Sri Lanka being to India what Hong Kong was to China. I mean, that's one possibility. Also, as you said, Dubai presents a model for us, particularly in the port city.
Yes.
But we've got to do some difficult things still. But we know what has to be done, right? Many people, the president of Sri Lanka probably knows best. He's extremely knowledgeable. He knows what to do. But all of us, from him downwards, need to get better at implementation and getting things done.
Absolutely. Yes, that's key, isn't it? Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kumaraswamy, for that inspiring engagement with us on Sri Lanka's economic road to recovery. It's clear that there's challenges ahead, but there's also huge reasons for optimism. And I think Sri Lanka, we've heard, has shown resilience in emerging from its worst economic crisis since independence. And although progress will continue to require some reforms that may be somewhat difficult to implement, the country can build on its strategic location, its educated workforce, and clearly the optimism which we've heard today. So I'm very grateful to you for sharing this invaluable insights into Sri Lanka's policy responses and the way forward. And your perspective on drawing on your decades of experience, including as central bank governor, is obviously of crucial context in how the country can stabilize its finances. And it's been very interesting to learn the lessons which you've pointed out that Sri Lanka needs to take on board to move forward. And thank you also for joining this discussion and for being our co-organizer to the Royal Commonwealth Society of Sri Lanka, led by President Iftikhar Aziz. And we can see that this is very committed to promoting Commonwealth objectives during this important juncture in Sri Lanka. And Aziz brings tremendous passion, energy, and commitment to revitalizing RCS in Sri Lanka, and which is incredibly important to, I think, promote Commonwealth values, and it's extremely admirable. So we wish RCS Sri Lanka all the best in continuing to help to foster collaboration and growth between Commonwealth countries and hopefully to improve business. So thank you both, Dr. Kumaswamy and Mr. Aziz. It's been a wonderful opportunity to learn so much about Sri Lanka. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today.
Julia, may I take the liberty of a quick postscript? Thank you
Yeah.
for reminding me. Location and logistics, massive opportunity.
Thank you. We'll remember that.
I missed out on that.
Right. Okay. Location and logistics. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.